My name is Melinda Carson. For some reason, my pals simply call me Linda. My father calls me Keith, as does he. Wait a second, I need to do something. Shut up, Mom. If you don't stop crying immediately, I will have the doorman escort you out. It's a happy occasion. Have you noticed that everyone here is smiling? I hissed at the woman seated centimeters away from where I was standing. But this shouldn't happen. She is in tears as she whines. She looks at me for sympathy but finds none. Mom, everyone in town is here and having a good time. You, more than anybody else in town, are responsible for this and the next celebration. So just deal with it and try to appreciate it, I hiss again. Fortunately for me, my voice does not travel far. I simply smiled and waved to the 2 or 3 persons who saw our talk. Everyone else's gaze is fixed on the back of the church. Anyway, as I was about to mention, my father is the only one who can call me Keith. Damn, I've lost my train of thought. I don't know what I was going to tell you. Okay, I believe the narrative is ended. No, you will not get off so easily. But since I can't remember where I was, I should probably start at the beginning. I walked home from school around a year ago. I had to choose an attire for the school's harvest dance. The harvest celebration was significant since it was the only outdoor meal and dancing we had. We live in California, and our weather is moderate. We don't see the fierce storms that hit the shore in the fall, nor do we notice the landslides that occur near the mountains. We are fortunate that the temperatures in October and November remain moderate enough to allow us to dance outside. The evening air is cool, but a light jacket or cape will suffice. I needed the correct clothing, despite the fact that I am not a cheerleader. I'm quite popular, so I need to create a good impression. I don't have to worry about finding a date or impressing anyone because I've been with the same guy since sophomore year. Given that he is the son of a preacher, he is quite moral. We prioritize entertainment over sex. My objective, which my mother had instilled in me since I was old enough to understand, was for me to walk down the aisle as a virgin while my husband awoke fatigued the day after the wedding. I planned to do something more. I was going to make Dean wake up terrified. My thinking is part of the reason I am popular. I joined the National Honor Society every year of high school and, with the exception of my freshman year, maintained a 4.0 GPA. In my first year, I received a C in physical education. I've never been particularly athletic. That year, as always, my father came to my help. During the summer, he made me run with him every morning when I returned to school. All the silly things I had to do to achieve an A got much easier. After my run, my father and I worked on the machines in his home gym. Unbeknownst to me, my physique transformed that summer. I gained significant strength while simultaneously losing weight in certain areas. I believe it was the bench presses, but my breasts became larger throughout the summer. My slender legs not only grew in size, but also improved in shape. And the alterations were not purely cosmetic. I was considerably stronger and better coordinated. The first day at the gym was something I dreaded. It was the day they conducted assessments. The examinations were meant to determine where you stand on the national fitness scale. It was dependent on how many push-ups, squats, and pull-ups you could perform. There was also a rope climb and then a mile run. We normally got everyone tested during the first week of school. I performed poorly my freshman year, and when the school examined me again last week, I needed to show a major increase in my fitness, which I did not. That's why I received a C. My father looked at my report card and didn't say anything. He hugged me and told me how pleased he was of me. I expected him to be upset, but he was definitely not. When we first started running together, he simply suggested it as a fun way to spend more time together while also being a daddy's daughter. I was all for it. He was really slender. We gradually extended the distance and duration of the race. We talked while running, laughing and joking. When my father began chatting about our upcoming vacation after a run one day, I knew I could tell him anything. I followed him to the gym, and it felt natural to begin performing curls with him. In fact, it took me a while to comprehend what he had intended. There was already a dumbbell with really light weights next to his bigger bell. Before I knew it, I had completed a whole training session with him, and we would go out or simply have breakfast together before beginning the day. He didn't place much importance on it. It's not like I was ever overweight. I was merely out of shape, and he gently encouraged me to get toned. When I returned to school after that summer, the first thing I noticed was how many people, both men and women, were staring at me in my athletic uniform. "What in the hell happened to you this summer?" asked Becky Thatcher. Becky has been my best friend from infancy and now lives around the corner from me because both of my parents, like her, work. We met in kindergarten. "Did you take supermodel classes or something?" she asked. "Do you have implants?" "No," I smiled. "Damn it, what have you done?" she asked. "I was simply spending time with Dad." I said, "But I did, highlighting my hair." Maybe that is the point. Last year, I was able to complete 8 women's push-ups and 20 squats. After that, I felt practically nauseous. I continued to speak with Becky as I approached. I finished 25 push-ups and saw that everyone was gazing at me as I moved on to the next activity, which was squats. The physical education teacher came up to me and asked who I was. Even Becky was looking at me. "Linda, you completed 25 push-ups?" she asked, puzzled. I should have stayed silent while constructing them. I mentioned that perhaps I could do more. I did not pay much attention. "Linda, you performed push-ups the man's way," she said. "Aside from the athletes and several onlookers, no one came close to matching your score before the time ran out." The teacher warned me not to do squats. "You only needed to do 50 to reach the maximum on the scale," he explained. "Last year, I couldn't do a single pull-up. I had to do what was known as a hang in a hanging. You pull yourself up and hang there, maintaining your chin over the bar for as long as possible. They had to lift me into place because I was unable to pull myself up. I only managed to hang for around 2 seconds. This year, I went directly after Big Mill, Milburn Drysdale. Big Mill was the center forward on our football squad. Big Mill weighed more than pound 200 during high school. He struggled to do pull-ups because of his weight, but he was as powerful as a bull, completing 11 pull-ups. I got on the bar and did 12. When my feet struck the floor, there was a hushed sigh throughout the gym. My father made me perform numerous sets of pull-ups with a weight belt around my waist. Every time I beat my prior score, our reward system awarded me a donut or treat. The second and third approaches proved the most difficult. I was used to performing 8 pull-ups with 25 pounds tied around my waist. It was easy to do just one set of 12 without any added weight. It was the conclusion of the first day of physical education class. Everyone was already speaking about me. Boys who had previously ignored me were suddenly crowding around us. Becky enjoyed the attention. We were still sitting at the table with the same individuals we had always been with. I knew what I wanted to do with my life, so being among intelligent people was a wonderful idea. I'd want to believe that I never changed throughout high school, but in my second year, the way others perceived me altered. This occurred last year during my final year of study. As I previously stated, I was attempting to locate the right dress and arrived home early. My English teacher was sick and there was no substitute. Because English was my final lesson, we were freed early. As I moved through the home, I heard moans coming from my parents' bedroom. I had not considered that. I was 18 years old. I knew what sex was, even though I'd never had any. I knew it would benefit my parents, and I didn't blame them for it. I knocked on their door and explained that when they were finished, I needed assistance with something. My mother constantly provided me dress tips. My father always offered me a man's perspective regarding my appearance. "Dad, where is Mustang?" I asked. My father never went anywhere without this car, and he never displayed it in the store without telling me how much he missed it. Suddenly, my memory went haywire. I recall hearing my mother's moaning voice, but not my father's. I pushed the door open, filled with wrath. I noticed my mother hurrying to get dressed, and the principal of my high school pulling up his pants. "You are a damn traitor," I screamed at my mom. "And you, Mr. Eddington? My father will kick your ass after this is all resolved. You'll be searching for a new employment." I slammed the door and raced out of the house. I hadn't even walked a block before my phone rang. I looked at the display and recognized my mother. I clicked the answer button and quickly hung up. I went to Becky's home. I stuck out with Becky that day and stayed with her until I knew my father was home. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed his Mustang. Large chrome exhaust pipes, wheels, and racing stripes made the car appear far more frightening than it was. I believe we all see things differently. My father thought the car as beautiful. When I glanced at it, it appeared angry with its blades, scoops, wings, and the sound it produced. That automobile was quite loud. However, for my father, the sound of these pipes was like music. I used my key to open the door. My mother grew frightened the moment I went through the door. "Hello, Keith." my father replied, smiling. He came up and hugged me like he always did. My father squeezes me so tightly that I can feel the love seeping from him. "Are you all right, kitten?" he asked. "It's been a difficult day, Dad," I began. "You know how you go through life thinking you can rely on certain individuals just to find out they're full of it?" Mom paled at my words. "Melinda, may I?" she began. I twisted my head swiftly and stared at her intently. My father did not notice the interaction. "Dad, we need to discuss something," I said. "Of course, Keith," he replied. "Would you like to wait until after supper, or should we do it now? It's okay." "After dinner, Daddy," I said. My father was always looking at things from the outside. No matter what the issue was, he made me feel safe. Others also treated him in the same manner. My father was an automotive engineer. He made his living by solving issues. He just knew how to see things from a different perspective. "Great," he said. "I want to install my own tuner into my car. I guess I'll have to dial back the power and throttle response. My gas mileage has never been excellent, but it is particularly bad right now." "You go play with your car, darling," Mom said. "Melinda and I will make the dinner." She took my hand and dragged me into the kitchen after kissing my father. After everything I had seen, seeing her brush his lips made me nauseous. "Melinda, sweetie," she started. "I understand you're meant to be my mother, but get your stupid hands off me right now," I hissed. "Do not ever touch me again." "Melinda, you have to let me explain this," she continued. "What exactly are you explaining?" I snorted. "You've been telling me nothing but nonsense your entire life. You and Dad have always acted like switches. Dad always said that if I wanted to be on the student council, I could do whatever I wanted. Go for it. You stated that many individuals are running, but only 6 are chosen. Thus, chances are minimal. You suggested I shouldn't run for prom queen since she is always chosen by the cheerleaders. Before the election began, my father gave me a necklace proclaiming that I was his prom queen. When I won, he asked if I had any doubts. You were surprised. You never believed in me, Mother. You are continually telling me what not to do. You flooded my mind with everything I couldn't or shouldn't do. Melinda, your skirt is too short. Melinda, good girls don't do that. Wearing this will make others think you're a slut. When I opted to study pre-law in college, I hoped to become a prosecutor and help bring those who have harmed others to justice. What have you told me? You said. Melinda, this is not what a girl should do. It appears that all you ever wanted was to deflate my dreams. Mom, watch your language, young woman. She said I was still yours. What are yours? I asked. Are you still my shining example of how a woman should be? I don't believe you are, unless all women are cheaters. Dad needs someone who adores him and is dedicated to him. Wait, isn't this the same rubbish you told me when I started thinking about boys? If you are unable to tread that path, perhaps you should avoid discussing it. But Melinda, I love your father. It was simply an oversight. I made a mistake. I am a human too. Please give me one more chance. This will not happen again, she wailed. Mom, mistakes happen unexpectedly or while you're drunk. This was done on purpose, and it most certainly happened previously. It is no coincidence that you bring a man home and sleep with him in my father's bed. You work with him every day. He is also married with young children at home. You wrecked 2 families because of a single error. Melinda, I sincerely apologize, she said. Please do not do this. This will cause your father pain and will unnecessarily separate our family. You've just said it. Why wreck 2 families? To punish me? Do you want your father to be hurt? Pick up the phone, call that idiot, and tell him you're quitting right away. If necessary, seek another work elsewhere, but if you return to school for any reason, I will notify Dad immediately. Give me your cell phone. If this asshole phones you, I will respond. And Mom, as soon as the bills arrive, I'll check all of the phone records throughout the house. You now know what to expect if you call even once. And from now on, do not talk to me. As far as I know, you died today. I'm an orphan. I want you to encourage my father to sleep in the guest room tonight and not have sex with him. Tomorrow, I want you to buy and burn a new bed. Tell him it's hall rot, bed bugs, or something like, I don't care what it is, but you better get it done. But Melinda, your father will notice if we don't act as usual, and this is your senior year. Many things will happen to you soon. There will be moments when you require a woman's viewpoint or guidance. I understand you're a daddy's girl, always has been, but you also need your mother, she said. I'll find someone I can trust and look up to fill this position, I hissed. Do you remember what I said? I turned and exited the kitchen. I went and got her handbag and delivered it to her. Melinda. Can I call him on the phone? She asked. No, because I've got your phone. Give it back. I said. She handed me her slick iPhone. I need you to call him at home. I said so. His wife will presumably answer the phone, and you will need to ask her whether you can speak with him. You must listen to the noises of his children playing in the background. Perhaps it will make you realize how bad you are. Melinda. Do you have to use that type of language? She asked with a petulant tone. Yes, Teresa, I replied. You once told me that being a lady involves more than simply knowing how to curtsy and use the proper fork. Being a lady entails appropriate acting and speaking, appropriate for the situation. Do you recall this? She nodded her head. When I'm with someone who has no morals, no class, and has the audacity to cheat on someone she adores, it's the terminology that fits the scenario. Besides, you and I shall not talk anymore. A lot will happen, and once I depart for college next September, we'll only see each other when I'm home visiting my father. I've got one more request for you, Mom. I said. She looked at me pleadingly. This is for the future. From now on, if a significant event occurs in my life, I want you to be ill, injured, or otherwise unavailable. This signifies I do not want you to attend my graduation. I do not want you at my college graduation either. I do not want you at my wedding. And if I ever have children, I doubt you'll be there. Are we all clear? I asked. She nodded. Call him. She called Eddington from her house phone. I'll have to resign my job, she announced at the time. You need another secretary. I won't be returning at all. Has someone packed my personal belongings and sent them to me? That person will not be you. Don, please mail my newest check or deposit it directly. Do not call me again or Melinda will inform my husband and your family. Goodbye. Congratulations, Teresa. I mentioned it was painful. What hurts? She asked. Tell your lover that you can't see one other anymore, I asked. Does this make you feel something? Do you feel an emptiness in your stomach? No, Melinda, she replied sadly. Russell irritates me. I only adore your father. Russell was just... Say nothing. I snorted. If you loved my father, you wouldn't. Melinda, you are so young now, she said. That will become clear to you someday. I pray I never understand things the way you view them. I spoke angrily. I'll never understand how a lady who is married to a man who absolutely adores her can cheat on him with someone like Mr. Eddington. Do you know even half of the rumors around him? You're plainly stupid, but how stupid are you? Mom, you are not the first lady, or even the first woman at our school with whom he began an affair. You're only the final one. I bet he can find someone else to please in less than a week. I put her phone in my pocket and exited the room. I went to the garage to check on Dad. He opened his Mustang's hood and inserted his tuner onto an engine port. His new tuner could wirelessly send information to his iPad. The men behaved like small boys with their toys. Toys became increasingly complicated and pricey as they grew older. 3 of our neighbors gathered around to peep beneath Dad's automobile hood. When I approached and began looking at him, he noticed me and smiled. The supper. Ready? He asked. No, Dad, I replied. Do not rush, as even a grown man can be naive. My father was. He appeared happy. He enjoyed his life. When he joked and talked to our neighbors, I felt so embarrassed that I considered depriving him of his happiness. He worked so hard to make our lives better. Mom only started working a few years ago when I was old enough to care for myself. She had no secretarial skills and volunteered at my high school. She subsequently started earning a salary as she took on more tasks, finally becoming Eddington's secretary. Then I decided not to say anything for the sake of Mom or Eddington, but rather for Dad's happiness. I wasn't sure if that was the proper option, but at the time, it seemed like it. When I got at school the next day, everything went well. About halfway through the first period, I was summoned to the principal's office. My perfectly planned day began to unravel. I opened the door to Eddington's office. My mother had quit, therefore there was no secretary there. Come inside and close the door. Melinda. He answered I would rather leave it open. I told him. So, can you just cover her? He stated, what we need to discuss must remain confidential. There's nothing to discuss between us. I asked Melinda, what about your future? He stated that the colleges you applied to would still be interested in your grades. If your GPA suddenly lowers, you may lose multiple opportunities. How does this happen, Mr. Eddington? I asked. Some of your teachers may suddenly begin to analyze your work more critically, he added, smiling. I suppose you already have a solution to this problem. I said. He nodded. Melinda, what occurred between your mother and me was an accident, but it should not jeopardize your career or anything else. Can we just... I turned around and slammed his office door so loudly that it was probably audible in the gym. His eyes grew big. Who in the heck do you think you are? I yelled. What are you, Darth Vader? Is this some sort of warning that the Death Star is about to destroy my home planet? Listen, Nicholas, this is the 21st century. No one falls for these cheap theatrical gimmicks anymore. So you want my mother? I am not as foolish as she must be. Except for my first year, I received a B+ in every year of my studies here. Do you know how I received my grades? I worked hard. Nobody handed me anything. If my grades suddenly dropped, I would approach my teachers with a copy of my work and beg them to reconsider. They would have to show me what was wrong with my work, as well as examples of others who did it correctly. Second, most of my professors adore me more than they adore you. Therefore, they would not condone your stupidity. Third, you just made yourself an even bigger fool because I pulled my new iPhone from my pocket and repeated his threat to him. His eyes grew even bigger, and he collapsed into a chair. So now I have proof that you attempted to keep me quiet, or you will attempt to persuade the teachers to interfere with my grades. I suppose it's unlawful, right? He nodded his head. So it's not enough that you've been a cheap Casanova during the last few years. You're now attempting to blackmail children in order to disguise your ties. Who are you the most terrified of? Russell? I asked. This is Mr. Eddington for you, Melinda, he cried. Is Mr. a respectable title or term? I snorted. Russell, I have neither of these for you. I have your miserable little life and career in my hands, and do you know what the silliest part of this is? He shook his head before you interrupted my science lesson. I'd previously promised with my mother not to inform Dad or your wife about this. What are you most terrified of? Are you scared that my father will exact revenge on you, or that you will lose your job? Think about it. I'm heading back to class. I hurried out into the corridor, still angry, and ran into Mrs. Abra, my favorite teacher. Are you all right, Melinda? She inquired, and everything became plain to me as I gazed into her eyes. Miss. Abra was nearly a legend at our school. All the boys and guys drooled over her. I recall more than once watching a guy stroll down a hallway, catch a glimpse of her, and then crash into a wall or door. About half the females at school despised her. It was completely unjust. All of these young women are approaching adulthood, as if the fruit on a vine were barely ripening. The majority of them then realize they have reached a stage in their lives where they are in better shape. Time and gravity are their closest companions. Then they meet a woman like Ms. Abra, who makes them appear like bumbling little boys. And as you gaze attentively at her, your grief intensifies. Most girls learn from an early age that we are all different. Each of us possesses something remarkable. We learn to accentuate our strengths while downplaying our faults. So if you're a female with oily skin, you know you need to dress sexier to showcase your figure and tone down your complexion. You can also grow your hair longer and playfully style it to conceal one or both eyes. If you don't have breasts, you most likely have a lovely or wonderful legs. So you avoid wearing bras and opt for shorter skirts to accentuate your assets. If you don't have a huge buttocks or legs, this isn't an issue. You wear low-cut clothes to show off to girls. If you're a thin model with no buttocks, breasts, or legs, your face will stand out. The idea is that God provides each of us something. The trick is to figure out what you've been given and do something with it. Then Miss Abra arrives to spoil everything. Let's start at the top. The woman is merely being unfair. She has what I term reactive hair. Her hair is naturally light brown. She informed me that while she was growing up, he was known as Mouse Brown because he was so shy and mousy. The women who had it were not very noticeable. It wasn't a rich, sensual dark brown that might be described as smoldering. It wasn't even remotely light. In Miss Abrams's hair reacts to sunlight. If there is a lot of sun, it will only be a few days before some of her hair begins to lighten. It looks incredible. Everyone always assumes that her hair is highlighted. If she wears her hair in a ponytail or styles it so that certain portions of it are not exposed to the sun, those areas appear to darken. And before you know it, her hair has 2 or 3 very natural tones mixed in. Half of the ladies I know spend a lot of money to acquire a certain look. They don't think about it. Her hair almost reaches her waist and flutters like butterfly wings, and her hair just serves to highlight her face. Her face is as stunning as the rest. Her eyes are the bluest. When she discusses arithmetic, the worst thing you can do is stare at her. Many boys have told me that when they stare at her, they fall into a trance. Her eyes are so blue that you completely forget where you are. I wish she had a larger nose, but hers is so little that it seems like an ornament on her face. And she does the stupidest things. She has something she deems a flaw. Her nose is covered in tiny, almost symmetrical freckles. She covers them with very light makeup because she despises them. Then when we walk outside and she isn't wearing makeup, all the guys notice her freckles and fall in love with her even more. I truly despise her mouth. At this period in history, we appear to be intrigued by lips all over the world. Women are receiving collagen injections to make their lips larger and fuller. Then there are women who were born with large lips. Mrs. Eyebrow's mouth is small, but it has the ideal Cupid's bow shape, making it appear larger than it is. Her teeth are also exceptionally white, and she smiles frequently. Her smiles are quick, so when something makes her smile in class, the entire room feels warmer because her head and face are visible. Her physique is intimidating. The sum of the parts does not have to equal the whole. She doesn't have huge breasts, but that doesn't matter. In fact, last year at a senior pool party, I forgot my swimsuit and Mrs. Abbott told me that since she was an escort, only I could take hers. She said it makes more sense for the students to have fun than the staff. I was confident I couldn't fill her top. Then I noticed it was only a 34-seat top. At 18 last year, I wore a thick C-top. Her breasts are not big at all, but her chest and torso are so small that her average breast size appears large on her. Her waist is also small, only 23 inches, which makes her butt look bigger than it actually is, and she runs every day like my dad. So her legs are intimidating. Mrs. Abra has a few quirks. This woman teaches math and science. She wears a lab coat all day, hiding her body. She also wears very long skirts and blouses that button up to the neck. She also wears those stupid safety glasses all the time, like she forgets she's wearing them. She just doesn't seem to realize how beautiful she is. The worst thing about her is that she is simply the sweetest person you could ever meet. She spends extra time with all of her students and really tries to make sure we understand how useful math and science are for our future careers. I think she has a weakness for shy, unassuming types. You often see her standing there smiling at one of those socially awkward but very smart guys. But she doesn't tolerate any nonsense from the guys on the team. She academically benched them more times than anyone cares to remember. When a coach stormed into her lab, angry that one of his players had dropped his GPA in her class to the point that he was on probation and unable to play, she refused to give him any opportunity. She didn't. I would give it to someone else. While we're on the subject of coach, he tried very hard to win over Mrs. Abra a couple of years ago. He was rejected outright. She made it clear to him that she was in no way interested in him. She went so far as to remove her name from the list of chaperones for any extracurricular activity in which he participated. Several other teachers also made their own attempts with her. She just didn't seem to want to date anyone. The coach started telling everyone that he knew when she showed no interest in him that she preferred girls. My mother once told me that she heard from one of the other science teachers that Mrs. Abra was once married. Abra was her last name after marriage. Her maiden name was Troy. Her husband was her childhood friend. He joined the army and died during training. The worst thing is that he didn't even get to serve his country. Although everyone who signs up makes us proud for her, it seemed like the biggest waste of her life. That her husband had died while training in a logistics procedure. He actually wanted to work for the same company as her father, and believed that helping move equipment and resources for the army around the world would be a valuable experience. He also assured her that all he did was essentially warehouse work, and receiving he will stay as far away from bombs and bullets as possible. The soldier, who was not familiar with operating a forklift, crashed into a rack containing boxes of heavy shells. The entire rack collapsed. The boxes were so heavy that they bent the safety cage that protected the forklift operator. He escaped serious injury, but her husband was crushed under literally tons of metal. "Are you all right, Melinda?" she asked, when she saw me leave Eddington's office. "Yes, ma'am. I'm fine," I said, "but he really gets on my nerves. Trust me." She grinned, showing her 2 white teeth. "This emotion is familiar to me. I didn't expect to see you exiting the principal's office. I hope you're not in trouble." "No, ma'am," I responded. "But now that you've addressed it, I truly need some advice. You know, some women pass on their fashion and style advice from generation to generation. So you want me to locate someone to give you fashion advice?" She spoke. "Well, I suppose we could ask Sandy. Do you know Mrs. Delacqua? She is quite knowledgeable about Parisian couture. She also likes fashion and model-related TV shows. Do you see what I'm saying? This woman has no idea how stunning she is. She wanted to assist me by approaching another woman who was not as attractive as her Mrs. Abra. I asked for your advice. Is this from me?" She gave a smile. "But you're far more lovely than I am. I'm not sure where to begin advising you. Now, if you ever required math assistance, you are the ideal person to help me." I spoke. "Okay." She gave a smile. "I will do my very best, but you'll also have to help me." "What do you need, ma'am?" I inquired. "First and second-year students do not sign up for nature hikes." She gave a frown. "They don't seem to find anything interesting in science. They prefer to do everything on a computer. Running through the forest isn't particularly enjoyable for them. Melinda, you're quite popular, and maybe if you told others you were joining—" "I'd want additional volunteers," she replied shyly. This woman is insane. All she had to do was remove her lab coat and those amusing glasses and make an announcement. And every man in school would turn up. If the boys turn up, the girls will follow. The difficulty was that the new pupils didn't recognize how attractive she was. "I won't just tell everyone," I said. "I will be there. Is it fine if I bring a friend?" "Of course," she answered, smiling. "The more people, the better. I need as many individuals as possible to traverse the jungle and collect samples." I returned to class that day, and when I got home from school, I ran into my mother again. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, smiling. I looked at her like she was crazy. I was 18, and she met me at the door with a platter of milk and cookies. "Hi, Teresa," I said venomously. "I thought we had agreed not to talk to one another." "Melinda, this is ridiculous," she remarked. "We're a family. You were pulled out of my womb. You are a part of me, so we should attempt to get along." "Teresa, have you ever heard the term, 'I can't go home'?" I inquired. She nodded in puzzlement. "What is the significance of this for us?" she inquired. "You know how people are born in a given region, grow up there, become renowned, and then leave when they return home. Everything in the neighborhood has changed. Everything they thought was great has been destroyed or was never truly amazing." I gave a smile. "I still don't understand how it works," she began. "Teresa, you mentioned it yourself. I was pulled out of your womb, but after what I saw yesterday, I wouldn't go back. All your life, you've given me a set of rules to obey, but you don't follow them. I don't have anything else to learn from you. I no longer respect you, so there's no use in communicating. But Melinda, we're not just a group of coworkers or athletes. We're a family. We must forgive one another when we make mistakes," she continued. "If you disagree with my decision, we may always notify Dad and let him make the decision, if he intends to forgive you." I said, "In my opinion, you cheated on a man who adores you and does everything he can to improve your life. What has Eddington done for you while you are ill? Is he the one who sits by your bed and massages your forehead? Is he the one who has always backed you? What exactly did he do to compel you to betray your husband?" I inquired. "Nothing," she said. "So if we do it your way, I will tell Dad what you did. Not only will I not talk to you, but you will also lose your spouse and daughter, right?" She gave a nod. "Teresa, just give up while you're down," I spoke. "I can't believe the daughter I nurtured is so harsh." She spoke. Her voice quivered and tears streamed down her cheeks. "Teresa, don't weep," I spoke. "You said it yourself yesterday. I'm Daddy's daughter. I dealt with you with gentleness. If you were someone else, and the person who wounded my father was someone I didn't love, I would have shattered his life. You got off lightly. If you don't do anything stupid again, you can stay married to him. Of course, if no one else is aware of what you did, catching you again, even with someone else, will not be pleasant. I waited in my room till Dad got home, then I went downstairs to eat dinner with him. Dad relaxed after supper, and I asked if he wanted to go for a walk or a little jog, just when we're about to go. My mom inquired whether we wanted her to accompany us. "Don't you enjoy running?" I remarked, smiling at her. "I can use your old bike." She gave a smile. "So we can all be together." "My bike has a flat tire," I said. "But if you really want to listen to me talk about school activities and attempt to persuade Dad to attend some of them, that's okay. We could also chat about yesterday now that you're there." "Well, if my bike has a flat tire, I will not be able to join you." She abruptly stated that my ass was too large to run. "I adore your ass, honey," my dad said. He kissed her, and I wanted to puke. My mother smiled at me when he kissed her and patted her ass. I believe she wanted to call it a victory when my father got up to change into exercise gear. She acknowledged me with a smile. "See, Melinda, he wasn't injured. He still loves me just as much. And believe it or not, I still love him. I would never injure him. He's the man I want to be with, spend the rest of my life. I just wanted a little excitement. It will be thrilling when he divorces your cheating ass," I remarked, smiling at her. She just shook her head and went into the kitchen to clean. Dad and I talked while we jogged. He was telling me about his work issues and what he planned to do with his Mustang. I informed him about Mrs. Abra's post-harvest dance and research expedition. I nudged him gently, and he decided to accompany me. When he promised me he'd bring my mother along, I told him I'd already asked her and she had other plans. So when Saturday arrived, Dad and I got up early and ate breakfast on the move. We were still dining when Mrs. Abra arrived in her automobile. She owned one of the new Pontiacs, a reissue of the iconic GTO. The car was released a few years ago and did not perform as well as GM had hoped. It was too similar to G6 and G8, and while the performance was excellent, it did not look like what muscle car aficionados desired. My father immediately jumped out of his Mustang and walked gently around it. He examined everything. He peered at the wheels, brakes, and dual exhaust pipes before leaning back to examine the body lines. Mrs. Abra stepped out of the car and headed towards me. My father is pictured here. I spoke. He's an automobile enthusiast. I noticed, so she said, "Dad, come meet my teacher." I let out a shout. "You do not need to be concerned about anything. Regardless of what you're attempting to figure out, your car is far more powerful." As soon as I contacted him, a van full of guys came up Coach Cleats and several members of the team got out and started looking about. "Hi." My father appeared shy. He offered his hand. "I'm Jim Carson." Elena said, "I am Keith's father." She shook his hand gently and stared into his eyes. My father did not look at me. I observed she tried to grasp his hand for an extra second than she should have. It wasn't much, but it's a start. "Could I ask you something?" My father began before Coach Cleats caught up to us. "Good day, beauty," he murmured. "I summoned my team to assist you with your issue." More cars arrived and children got out. Some participants brought their parents or younger siblings. She said, "I don't see how they can help by playing football. If they don't want to be here, they should leave. I need soil and water samples. I need to know where they came from. I need plant and leaf samples. If they get it wrong, I'll have to start over. They are capable of handling the situation." He spoke of beauty. "And you and I can go find something together." "We'll see you later, Elena," my dad said. "Elena," Coach Cleat said. "Well, Elena, let us get started. I'm Mrs. Abra." "Coach," she spoke. "I dislike being called pretty, and we aren't on good terms. I'm not sure why you came today, but I'd appreciate it if you could keep an eye on your lads so they don't trample the plants while we're here. The idea is to understand nature rather than destroy it." When one of his guys in the background mumbled, the coach went red and looked like he was about to burst. Frozen. I shook my head before following Mrs. Abra. The morning and early afternoon were quite hectic. I automatically linked up with my father and we explored all of the forests, locating what we were supposed to locate. Mrs. Abra was ecstatic and frequently asked us where we got a certain sample, following us around to examine it for herself. It was interesting to observe her and my father interact. I could see that if given the chance, they would cooperate. But the funny thing was that they were nearly never alone. Many mothers and their boys or daughters attempted to speak with my father at the same time. Numerous guys attempted to approach Mrs. Abra, Finally, late in the afternoon, the school bus driver arrived in a van to transport all of the samples back to school, and Miss Abra thanked everyone and directed them to stop. She informed us that the day had been a success and that the school science program thanked everyone. Everyone got into their cars and drove away. I was prepared to go too. I needed to ponder deeply. I saw Russell Eddington appear in the morning, but he did not remain long. I believe he departed when he spotted my father and me. I also spotted my mother's automobile. I wasn't sure if she was there to see Eddington or to inquire about what I was doing, but she drove past and continued on her way. Perhaps it was a coincidence. I had a lot of difficulties to tackle, and I was also hungry. As we got inside the car, Abra remarked, "Jim May, first and foremost, I want to thank you for coming. You and Melinda were my most effective lab helpers today. Second, you were going to ask me a question just before everyone arrived, right?" My father gave her a shy glance, and she smiled back. I suddenly felt less hungry. In the end, things might not be as horrible as I thought. "Come on, Dad, invite her to dine with us." My father said nervously, "I thought it was something personal." "Jim, you spent your Saturday digging in the soil for me." She spoke. "Just ask me. Could you please show me?" He started. I had some thoughts. My father was above it, but my mother certainly was not. Abrams's eyes also narrowed, but my father continued to dive toward doom. "I'd really like to see," he continued, "the engine of that GTO. It is expected to have a 5.7-liter V8 engine. This is the same engine used in the Corvette that year. I am intrigued. Why does it only generate 350 horsepower? Which year is this? Because the old 4 had 350 horsepower, while the Yo 6 had 400, while both are really respected. With such a huge engine, you'd expect to get more out of it. I mean, my Mustang has just 5.0 liters and makes 462 horsepower without forced air. So I'm not sure what you're talking about." She gave a laugh. "But you can gaze at it as much as you like." She was still smiling at him and shaking her head as she entered the car and opened the hood. Dad took it up, secured the support, and started looking at what the boys were looking at. Their MZ Abra stepped out of the car and stood by him. Unfortunately, Coach Cleats hopped off the bus and went to his car. "Bob, what's wrong with your car? Please help me, Sabra," he inquired aggressively. "Nothing," she spoke. "Do you have a place to stay?" "No, I am alone tonight," he said. "So what exactly are we looking at? Isn't this a motor? From here I can tell what is wrong with him. You need to repair your carburetor. Perhaps we can get by with only cleaning it. I believe we have the fluid on the bus. This engine lacks a carburetor." My father explained that it is fuel injection. "Exactly," said Coach Clint. "I intended to pour starting fluid into the injector. I'll let you guys continue if you cannot repair it. Give me a call. You still have my phone number, correct?" "Yes, I have your number," Miss Abra spoke sarcastically. She turned back to stare at the engine with my father, who, frozen once more, emerged from the bus to a roar of laughing. "Dad, eat," I spoke. A few minutes later, we bid Mrs. Abra farewell and returned home. My mother had not made dinner when we arrived home, as it was Saturday. When we entered, she gave us a doubtful glance. She approached Dad and hugged him before looking at me. I kept a neutral expression. "Melinda, today is Saturday, my sweetheart. Do you have a date or something?" she inquired. "Mom, I said that Dean and I went out last night and will probably sort something out tomorrow afternoon. However, on Saturday nights, he must assist his father in cleaning the church. Remember? I contributed to this, just to be close to Dean. But his mother bothered me. Why are mothers always causing problems?" Mom immediately moved into a defensive stance. "I was not trying to cause difficulties, honey," she explained. "I was wondering if you were busy with anything. You're a lovely girl. You should relish life. This is your final year of school. If you want to get into a good law school, you'll need to take your studies seriously next year. You work hard, and I want you to be able to rest comfortably." Mom, life does not always revolve on having fun. Today, I had a terrific day bonding with my dad. I had a lot of fun, and we also assisted one of my teachers. As you mentioned, I'm going to college next year and want to spend as much time as possible with my father. Besides, didn't you always say that family comes first? You also informed me that sometimes you have to do what Tammy Wynette did and support your boyfriend. I understand how unfortunate it is that Dean is stuck in the church. We're not particularly religious, but his parents are. He does not want to offend them, therefore we accept it. Because I am in a relationship with him, I must adhere to the program. Remember, you taught me to put my relationships first. When I hurled her own bullshit at her, she became pale. I like how you say it, Mom. I spoke. Girls who have multiple relationships are frequently left without one of their own. She looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. Well, I did not cook dinner, she remarked, changing the subject. I was thinking that if you were going out, maybe your father and I could just order pizza and watch pay TV and see what happened. That seems nice. I spoke. I took my father's hand and led him out of the kitchen. I'm going to order pizza. Dad, you turn on the huge screen and find a movie for us. Please do not select one of those cheesy love stories that end tragically with one of the lovers dying or cheating. Dad came to the door a short time later to pick up the pizza from the delivery guy, and they ended up talking about his Mustang. My mother took advantage of the chance to speak up again. She begged, "It would be nice if you could let me spend the evening alone with your father." How can I change the situation if you never leave us alone? 3 things I said in a caustic tone. Before you even consider touching him again, you should get tested for STDs. Number 2, I noticed you driving by the park at the same time as your lover, or shortly thereafter. If I discover you've spoken with him, all bets are off. 3rd, I felt we shouldn't be talking to each other. I just finished my last sentence when Dad placed the pizza in front of us. He said, "I will get drinks for all of us." Mom and I smiled and nodded. She even reached out and lightly patted my shoulder. I'm sure my father didn't notice anything. He remained relatively calm unless someone threatened his family or mentioned his car. We were fighting again as soon as he entered the kitchen. "If you ever touch me again, you will be divorced before you can withdraw your hand. I lost my temper. Melinda, please give me the opportunity to make peace. I'm not against you. I know you and your father decided you wanted to be lawyers, but you treat me as if I were a criminal. Even criminals are presumed innocent unless proven guilty." She spoke. "Mom, do you have an agreement? Let's call it a contract with your dad. Didn't this agreement require you to be faithful to him?" I inquired. But she muttered, "There are no buts." I spoke. "Didn't that necessitate commitment and trust?" "Yes," she answered. "You broke it." I said, "We don't need any proof because I was there. I caught you red-faced and red-handed. Is this also true?" "Yes," she spat. "But can't I make amends for what I did? When someone steals something, they give it back and apologize and then move on. Mom, you're either crazy or stuck at 3 years old. I spoke. When someone robs a bank, even if he returns the money, he goes to jail. In that case, how can you compensate for the damage? Once again, I treat you much better than you deserve. I had to tell Dad everything. You could live with your grandma again right now, and Mom, you won't stay with the house. I know this. Most of all, people think that the house goes to the woman Dad paid the mortgage himself. You're not even listed on it. And in most cases, the house actually goes to the parent and child. Since I'll be off to college soon, I might add that if Dad pays for it, the judge will find me living in this house until I graduate. Make no mistake, Teresa, I am much older than the age when any judge can ask my opinion, and there is no doubt which parent I would prefer to live with. I smiled at her. So I see that you live with your grandmother, and you know that she will be very angry with you when she finds out why you got divorced. Dad will probably waive child support and your half of my school expenses since you can't afford it. Even if you went back to Dam Eddington. I forgot that you can't do this because in the 3 days that you were gone, he already got a younger and prettier secretary. So at 38, you are left without any skills except those you may have behind you. You're living in your mom's basement with debt piling up. I'm sure Dad won't let me get kicked out of school for this. You don't pay your share and he probably won't keep you on child support. Your lawyer will likely negotiate the deal. Dad doesn't have to pay you child support in exchange for you not paying child support and him paying for all my college expenses. Does this seem fair to you? No, she said loudly. I would have gone broke. I don't have any skills. I dropped out of college to have a child who no longer values me. I made one error. Why should I lose home? My family, my marriage, and my daughter for one mistake. Mom, forgetting to add bleach is a mistake. Having sex with another man in my dad's bed is a criminal offense. I said my facial features were tense when I spoke to her. Acid dripped from my words as far as I understand, Dad. I fell silent when he entered the room with a tray. He placed a tall, fluted glass of white wine in front of his mother. I also had a bottle of wild cherry Pepsi and Dose Squeeze Amber in front of me for himself. He sat down on the sofa himself at the far end, Mom in the middle and me at the opposite end. I stood up to grab the cable remote control, and when I returned to the couch, I leaned over and hugged my mother. This shocked the hell out of her. After the conversation she had just had, then I squeezed between them and put my feet on the coffee table as we sat down to watch the movie. I spent Sunday morning thinking about my problem. I found it strange that an 18-year-old girl who was still a virgin was trying to teach her almost 40-year-old mother a moral lesson. All my life, my father protected me, and this time I had to protect him. I've seen enough of my friends go through their parents' divorce to know it's usually the parent who got cheated on who gets the worst of it. When Daniel's father cheated on her mother with his secretary, they divorced. Her mother received a house and a monthly check, but she became withdrawn and depressed. She started drinking and just became a different lady. This also affected Danielle. Her mother's self-esteem and confidence were destroyed. Meanwhile, her father married his secretary. He got her pregnant, started his new family with a woman half his age, and moved on with his life. Somehow, the money he had to pay Danielle's mother was not enough for the grief he gave her. She will also only receive child support for 5 years. It seemed like such a waste. She was trapped in this house full of tainted memories, wondering what she had done wrong. She was too depressed to move on with her life or even try to find a job. Maybe that's why I was so angry with my mother. I didn't want my father to go through this, if their marriage was about to end. I needed to make sure he got back on his feet. My attempt to fix him up with Miss Abra failed. My father didn't even realize how hot she was. Hell, he could barely ask her to look at the engine of her blasted automobile. And miss. Abra was no help either. I could tell she was intrigued in my father, but she too was too shy to take any action against him. This only emphasized one of the concerns I have with the Bible. If the meek inherit the earth, they would not know what to do with it, and someone else would take it away from them. I needed to find someone who would be more forceful towards my father. My mother was unaware of it. But none of what we discussed was particularly important. I just dragged her along with me until I was about to throw her overboard. Did I feel bad for lying to her? Of course not. She didn't feel bad or think there was anything wrong with what she did until she was caught. Then I realized I already knew who my father's ideal person would be. Danielle's mother would be perfect for him. She didn't have the same sweetness as Miss Abra, but who does? Mrs. Kinney was still slimmer and stronger than my mother. She also looked attractive, or if I could convince her to put on makeup and conceal the bags under her eyes, she could help her dad get over her mother, and he could help her get over her divorce and feel like a woman again. I'm not sure why I didn't think of it first. Monday was a particularly hectic day at school. Mr. Addington chose to avoid me. I tried going to his office and telling him I saw him in the park on Saturday, but he seemed to disappear every time. Nonetheless, I saw him have lunch with his new secretary. Ms. and I met over lunch. Abra. I think she was looking for me. "Hi, Melinda," she spoke. "So what did you need from me?" "I just wanted you to assist me in selecting an outfit for the Harvest Festival dance." I said I would be delighted. She gave a smile. "But I told you, I knew exactly where she was going." "Ms. Abra, you are stunning," I spoke. "You are probably the sexiest woman I've seen. Guys fall madly in love with you immediately." Before I could finish my thought, she said something under her breath that made me stop in my tracks. "I would rather have your assistance." "Then please forgive me for this because I am sure she is your friend. But there's a fat art teacher who believes she's America's next top model." I mentioned that we exchanged strange looks. "I'm very sorry," she said. "I did not want to say it out loud. I didn't mean it to sound like that. I didn't mean what I said about your friend. I mentioned that we needed to talk. I asked if you could take me home after school. You are welcome to come over to my house and see what outfit I choose, and then we can have a snack and discuss what you mentioned. I promise that whatever we discuss will remain between the two of us." She appeared nervous, but nodded and left. "I was so excited when I told her how attractive she was," she said quietly. "It's too bad your father doesn't think so. I was so excited after this conversation that I couldn't sit still until class ended. I noticed that my concentration was slipping and kept checking my watch. Finally, 330 appeared. I packed my books and practically dashed to Miss Abram's lab. As usual, there was a group of students waiting to speak with her about something. The majority of them were guys who only wanted to look at her. I noticed that after Saturday's walk, she had a much bigger following among the freshmen and sophomores, so we could do more than just collect samples. This got me thinking about a few things. First and foremost, I never imagined myself wanting to be so beautiful. This will most likely be a pain in the ass. All sorts of guys you're not interested in are constantly trying to get your attention. It made me think about Saturday and the coldness she displayed toward Coach. I think this helped me better understand her. She was courteous to the majority of the male volunteers, but also wary. She kept a neutral expression and avoided smiling excessively. But with the Coach, she seemed to take every opportunity to push him away. Then I remembered how the Coach took advantage of every opportunity to act as if they were in a relationship. He called her baby, then attempted to address her by name. She categorically refused both of these attempts. Then I realized that things were probably worse for her than I had anticipated. On the other hand, I obviously missed her interest in my father. She introduced herself to him and called him back when we were about to leave. She also permitted him to ask her a personal question. My father's definition of what is personal is ridiculous. She then stood as close to him as possible without touching him while he looked at her car's engine. I also remember her smile as they stood there. This, of course, prompted the Coach to enter and make a fool of himself once more. Remembering this series of events made me seriously consider trying to persuade her to do something with my father. I have to admit that while not a weakling, my father is not particularly aggressive, with all the Toms, Dicks, and Harrys in the area admiring her at first sight. What is the significance of their relationship for my father? "Are you okay, Melinda?" asked Miss Abra. When I looked up, I realized we were alone in the room. I was so deep in thought that I didn't realize she had dismissed all of her students and was waiting for me. "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "I was simply thinking. You do that frequently, don't you?" She gave a smile. "That is probably why you are such a good student." We got in her car, and I decided to put it to the test. As we drove out of the parking lot, she started the engine and the car took off, spraying gravel behind us. "Not bad," I said. She gave me a look. "Your car has power, but it's also smooth. My father would not have been able to do it if everyone in the area had not ducked. I think I could drive this car." I spoke. "You don't use your father's car?" she inquired. While I was speaking about this, I was examining her voice and everything she did. Her hands tightened their grip on the steering wheel, and her legs tensed up considerably. I also mentioned cars in general. She was responsible for raising my father's Mustang, so he let me drive her. I explained that I am the only person he has ever allowed to do this. But this car scares the crap out of me. Excuse the expression, but it's correct. My father treats this car like it's his second child. However, this is a cruel thing. If you don't turn on the traction control, forget about it. Each time it starts, it burns rubber. His previous Mustang was equipped with a manual transmission. I struggled to change gears because the clutch was so tight. This car has an automatic transmission. My father must have racing reflexes because this car can reach 35 miles per hour without even stepping on the gas. I don't know how my father does it on residential streets and the highway. Every time you look at the speedometer, you are scared. I've only been driving for a little over a year, so I don't enjoy driving fast. I took her on the highway once and probably thought I was going 60. When we drive faster than 65 miles per hour, our family car shakes slightly. I noticed I was passing cars as if they were standing still. So I checked the speedometer and realized I was going 90 miles per hour, and the car was as solid as a rock. She was really purring. This horse enjoys running. When we arrived at the house, she had pulled into the driveway behind my mother's car. I left, and we proceeded to my room. I pulled out my chosen outfits, and she examined them all before saying anything. "They're all good," she said. "However, I believe that the person within them will make the biggest difference. Melinda, you can look great in any of these outfits and will undoubtedly be one of the best-dressed women at the dance. I would rule these two out unless you have something that can be used as a stall at night, even if it is warm during the day." The dance becomes chilly. The sound of our voices must have carried because my mother looked into the room before entering. "Good day," she said. "I had no idea you were already home, Melinda. Alternatively, you may have a guest. Mrs. Abra, it is good to see you." "Hi, Teresa," Mrs. Abra said. "Please call me Elena. I just realized I hadn't seen you in about a week. You are on vacation, right?" "No," my mother said, looking at me. I've given up. Can I get you something to eat or drink? No, Teresa, thank you. We're going out to get some food. I didn't know you were resigning. Whenever someone leaves, we usually throw a party. The decision needed to be made quickly. I doubt anyone is aware of this yet. On the other hand, I doubt I could have worked as closely with Russell as you have. This man is making my skin crawl. He's worse than Coach Cleats. Every time I stand in front of him, I believe he is imagining how I would look without clothes. Women, you must be carrying stones in your head. Or you must be a real slut to date someone like him. I am not envious of his wife. My mother was visibly nervous. Well, have fun. She replied and resumed her work. I tried on both outfits and we both decided that the blue dress fit better. Following that, I changed back into my clothes and we went to Wendy's. When we sat down for hamburgers, she asked her first question. Melinda, if your mother is home, why didn't you just ask her to assist you in selecting outfits? She asked. We'll get back to this. I said, can we start with the most important topics? Fine. She grinned at me, amused. Melinda, you will be an excellent prosecutor. You can see the essence of things. I nodded. I don't mean to be rude or hurtful, ma'am, but this is vital to me. Please forgive me if I step on your toes. Okay, I replied. She was still smiling at me. You like my father, don't you? I asked. Suddenly, she choked on her French fries. She took a big swallow of her soda and peered at me, wide-eyed. Of course not, she mumbled. I am not a destroyer of families. Your dad is married. I simply gazed at her. She hesitantly ate her fries. No one will ever know what we discussed here, I said, still gazing at her. Melinda, I am 33 years old, she began. I have only been in love once. It ended terribly, and I've remained on the sidelines ever since. I wasn't opposed to moving on. I simply didn't. A few years ago, I returned to my hometown to see my in-laws. I suppose I became lonely and wondered if one apple from the same tree would work where nothing else had. He has 3 brothers. The eldest was an alcoholic who abused his spouse. The youngest, 5 years younger than me, was a drug addict. And the middle one, who served in the army alongside my husband, is in prison. For a while, I pondered what my life would be like once he returned from the army. Would he have been like his brothers, or was he a unique individual? I suppose I'll never know. My sister-in-law claims that Robert, the older brother, was an angel throughout the first 5 years of their marriage. She claimed that as he grew older, he changed and became more like his father. She never anticipated him to attack her the first time she told me to remember the good times, but I got the idea she assumed he would have changed as well. I wanted to move on, but I react to most men in the same way you would to a tree. I am not foolish, Melinda. I know I am attractive, but so are you. Can't you tell if you like a person based on his appearance or if he just wants to have sex with you? I nodded, and she was correct. I've spent my entire life attempting to overcome my appearance, she explained. I had to work twice as hard as everyone else to prove my interest in science. In college, hardly one wanted me in their group for group projects because they felt I was foolish. I married the only guy that watched it, Melinda. He was amusing and shy, and he danced to various songs. Do you remember what he told me the first time? I shake my head. I was in the library, holding a book. He approached and sat down next to me. He began writing a term paper. His work was supposed to be printed, but he handwrote it. Later on, I learned that he always did things his way. It doesn't matter. No matter what. He was a lousy typist, but had excellent handwriting. We eventually started exchanging a lot of glances. Finally, he simply stared at me and remarked, God, you are so ugly. He said this with a huge smile on his face. Shall we eat lunch together? Why would you want to show off with me if I am so ugly? I asked. My father cautioned me not to fall in love with a gorgeous woman. And because I want to marry you more than anything in life, you must be unattractive, so that I do not betray my pledge to my father. She said he consistently astonished her until the end, and no one has had such an impact on me since his death, until I met your dad. He's such a contradictory person. He is incredibly attractive, but rather than being arrogant, he is modest. He is obviously confident in himself, but unlike the other fathers who were present on Saturday, he did not stand with other men discussing golf. He spent the day running through the woods with his kid. You could see the excitement on his face when you discovered various leaves or insects. It seemed like every freaking guy was approaching me, and I felt compelled to fall on my face and kneel to them because they said something cliché. I suppose I feel desperate because I am a widow. She sighed and resumed eating on her fries. Melinda, I believe I'm desperate. My biological clock is ticking like crazy, but I intend to marry again in my life. When I find a companion, it will last for the rest of my life, so it must be the proper person. And since you stated that this will remain between us, I believe you. Yes, I truly like your father. However, there is no need to be concerned. I'm not the type of lady that pursues married men. Besides, he is more interested in my automobile than in me. I was terrified to breathe throughout our conversation. I'd never felt this way before. I desperately desired his contact, but I didn't dare. She appeared melancholy as she ate more of her hamburger. Despite her melancholy expression, she appeared more calm. It was as if being able to tell someone about it took a lot of stress off her shoulders. I'll help you, I said, as she hung her head and ate a cheeseburger. She stopped chewing and choked again. I had to stop chatting while she was eating before I murdered her. Melinda, he is married, and your mother? He is cheating on him. I spit loudly. My mother was entertaining. Russell Eddington was in my father's bed when I discovered them. She does not deserve him. I will not allow her hurt anyone. They are getting a divorce. That's why she had to leave her terrible job. I cannot stand her. That is why I avoid asking her for advice on anything. My father will be crushed when he finds out. The only way for me to accomplish this is to find someone who is a better fit for him. Someone who can help him cope with the agony he will experience when he finds out. Then help him go on. You are ideal for this position, ma'am. And the reason he hasn't noticed you is that he believes he's faithful to a lady who deserves him, regardless of how beautiful you are. My father is clearly not a cheater. We only need to get you together a few times. I got home feeling better than I had since it all began. I wanted to take out a cigar. Say I enjoy it when a plan comes to reality. I suppose that's why I was astonished when the wheels of my wonderful idea began to come off. Melinda, what the hell are you playing at? The mother asked fiercely. You're correct. I saw you at the park on Saturday. I was terrified you'd tell your father. Barbie, I witnessed you introducing him to mathematics and science. Then you actually brought that bitch into my home. If you require assistance selecting your clothes, it is my responsibility. I am your mommy. Did you know she prefers girls? She asked. I began laughing aloud. She does not prefer girls. I laughed. You presumably heard it from Eddington, right? No, she isn't like that. She's simply fussy about her males. What do you mean? She inquired carefully. I knew I had it. This was not what I had planned. But it'll probably work. Do you recall our chat about how you reconciled with Dad? I asked. She nodded enthusiastically. The only way to balance things out is for Daddy to have sex with someone else. Everything will go smoothly, and we will be able to reunite as a family. I'm tired of all this rage, Mom. I miss you. So if your father has sex with her a couple times, it's finished. And you won't tell him? She asked. And you will forgive me too. That was the plan, I explained. But it will not work. Dad did not even glance at her twice. He was more focused on her card. And she was. Will I help you? She said. Nobody knows your father better than I do. We just need to get them together in enough circumstances where they have to contact each other. When we're ready to lower the boom, we'll need to get your father intoxicated. Allow me to consider for a moment while I cook dinner. We can do it. She grinned brightly and extended her hand for me to give her a high five. God, she's so foolish, I thought as she left the room the next day at school. I told Mrs. Abra, or Helena, as I nicknamed her, because we were partners in crime, regarding the new developments. I also told her about my mother's first concept, which was to bring the two of them together. We had to throw a gathering that also served as a practice dance for the harvest dance. This was primarily done so that younger school children may learn to dance before the big event. The majority of the children excelled at dance club-style dances, but had limited experience with partner dances, such as those done at a harvest festival. I persuaded Helena to volunteer as a chaperone and promised her that I would strive to get my father to do the same. Once there, I persuaded them to dance with each other, and we were one step closer to bringing the two of them together. The weird thing is that this thought occurred to my mother as the evening of the practice dance approached. I observed that my mother was becoming increasingly concerned. I still didn't talk to her much, but I told her about the idea. She had some interesting ideas for what to do following the practice dance. Regardless, there was enchantment in the air. On the night of the rehearsal dance, I let my mother place a flower in my hair while I was waiting for Dean to pick me up. Dad and I were both surprised when Mom did not show up. I became angry and dragged her away. I honestly thought it would be fun to have her over here and have her see Daddy dance with Helena. I wanted to savor the way she squirmed while seeing a woman younger than her. She is stronger and more attractive than her. She did everything she could to arouse my father right in front of her. Both Helena and I agreed that my mother did not love my father. Despite her statements, she refused. The first blow came from her infidelity. If she truly loved him, she would not cheat on him. The second blow was her refusal to admit everything when she was apprehended. The ultimate blow was that she was not only willing to allow him have sex with another woman, but she was also willing to help arrange and execute the event. She had nothing to do with my dad. If she loved him as much as she claimed, she should have cried at the notion of his having sex with another person. I looked at her in the kitchen, my father upstairs, and Dean waiting in the living room. "Why don't you go?" I asked. "Go upstairs and dress now." "Melinda, you do not want me there," she said. "Think about it, honey. You possess an analytical mind. You know how bashful your father is. There is no way he will dance with Helena while I am present. He will take things into consideration. This is an insult to me. Second, you'll need to persuade him that Helena is lonely and angry because no one will dance with her anymore. Aside from that, he will not approach her, regardless of how beautiful she is." I had to accept that the bitch was correct. I didn't even consider how to persuade him to dance with her. What I didn't comprehend was that my mother had outwitted me. Damn, I was just 18. I couldn't keep up with all of the factors. And she was mean. While Dean and I were driving to the dance. He tried to start a discussion, but my mind was preoccupied with other things. There were numerous things that could go wrong. I stretched out to take Dean's hand. He's quite lucky. His calm demeanor reminded me of my father. This was one of the reasons I adored him so much. Dean was as committed to a cause, idea, or person as my father was. However, unlike my father, Dean would never have to worry about the woman he loved cheating on him. Aside from the fact that the parking lot fills up after dark, the school stayed untouched. We stopped by Dean's house so his father could take a picture of us as his mother chewed gum. Okay, I take that back. It was offensive to suggest that his mother was a cow. In fact, I'd like to apologize to the cows who were upset by my insensitive comparison. I smiled as we approached the door, hearing the engine's thunderous roar. "Wow, it must be your father's Mustang," Dean stated. I laughed and shook my head. "No, honey, that is not my father," I said. A few seconds later, we heard an even lower and louder hum, and the driver began the engine as he approached the parking lot. "This is my father's Mustang," I said. The two vehicles pulled together and parked next to Dean's Toyota. I'm sure most people assumed it was a coincidence that my father's GTO and Mustang GT arrived at the same time and parked next to it. But for me, it was more of an omen. I interpreted this as a sign from the authorities that they had not only sanctioned but also blessed this coupling. I watched Miss Abra glanced across the car at my father. My dad fiddled with his keys. Coach appears out of nowhere, runs up to Helena's car and attempts to open the door for her. Because the door was locked, he tried several times. She rolled down the window and asked what he was doing. "I am only opening your door, sweetie." He smiled. "I'm trying to be a freaking gentleman here. I imagined we'd spend the majority of the evening massaging bellies, and if we're lucky, we might as well start the rest of the night on a positive note." "We don't start on any note," she remarked coldly. "We do not even start the same song. Your comment about belly rubs is unacceptable. The workplace. I could easily file a sexual harassment complaint against you." "Hello, Helena," my father said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hoping you could show me where the gym is." "Aren't you a football coach?" he asked Coach Collitz. He extended his hand to shake. "I heard the squad is doing well. People think you might even win a game this year." Elena's car's locks opened and she got out. It was as if every head in the parking lot turned simultaneously. Helena donned a white sheath dress that accentuated her curves. She wore a string of pearls around her neck and in her hair, just like me. She had a big flower on one side. She looked my father in the eyes and said, "Hello, Jim. I would like to show you around. In fact, they prefer it when escorts operate together. One of us will deal with the girl while the other deals with the boy. Just let me get my purse." She sat back in the car, grabbing an expensive-looking white leather clutch. She grasped my father's arm and they went into the building together. I took Dean's hand and tugged him along. I needed to know what occurred next. When they first walked in, I noticed that many people were staring at them. Helena might as well have set a target for herself. The majority of the women present were immediately hostile. She established new paradigms as soon as she entered the building. Its impact was particularly strong among women. She and my father looked like they belonged together. I was proud of how my father intervened to assist her with the trainer, who was still angrily chasing behind them. "Okay, we are here and you are safe." My father smiled. I had a horrible feeling as he turned to leave. "Jim," she whispered gently, "where are you going?" "I was just trying to get you away from the guy who was hitting on you," he said. "I am going to go check on Keith." She took his hand again. "You saved me. So you're stuck with me. Also, you did an excellent job with Melinda. It is time to give her some space. She is a smart, self-sufficient woman. I believe we are in need of some TLC." My father was ashamed, but he sat at the table with her. Then, what I thought was another disturbance to my plan occurred. We all heard the sound of an automobile engine running from my father's jacket. He smiled and pulled out his iPhone. Helena looked across from me and I shrugged. "Hello, honey," he said. "Do you feel better?" Then he chuckled, listened, and remained silent. I was certain he'd rush to her residence and make a checkmate. This woman beat me up, but at least I got him to focus on Helena. He motioned for me to approach him. "I have problems," he remarked. "Your mother claims Helena is miserable because only idiots ask her out." I spotted the coach. "Honey, he is an asshole. Your mother believes I should dance with her. How in the hell am I expected to accomplish this?" "You can do it, Dad," I said. "Simply be yourself. After all, you're just asking her to dance, not marry you." The DJ wasn't entirely tuned in for some, but when he played the song, a large crowd took to the dance floor. Dean and I went dancing, and as he swirled me around the floor, I couldn't help but glance at our table. Dean and I returned to the table. A man approached Helena and asked if she wanted to dance. "I would love to." She spoke warmly, but I had already promised someone all my dances. Although he has not yet asked me, he must be an imbecile. The man spoke. Before Elena could speak, the DJ played another song. We heard a wailing female voice with a lovely Irish accent. "The light of day is gradually diminishing. Time stands still for you. I am only waiting for you. A light touch, and I feel feeble." "Come on, Jim, they are playing our music," Elena said. "Have we have a song?" I asked my father when they got on the dance floor. I listened to the song. When the singer reached the chorus, I couldn't help but smile slightly. Elena understood exactly what she was doing. So, keep going. Come on, leave me breathless. Tempt me. Tease me until I cannot deny it. Loving and feeling. May I long for your kiss? Keep going. Come on, leave me breathless. They danced. Despite his first confusion, my father smiled. I realized everything will be fine. Looking at Elena, I knew he was in capable hands. She began to dance with him officially, slowly, and purposefully. I pulled him in closer. When they weren't dancing, they sat at the table, laughing and conversing. Elena was in seventh heaven. She was just beaming. Men from all sides attempted to catch her look, but she kept both eyes fixed on my father. She caught my gaze and whispered softly, breathless. Even though my poor father didn't realize it, he was having an almost ideal first date. We'd barely been there for about 3 hours. The fantasy ended. Coach Cleats was angry and inebriated, so someone must have added something to the punch. He moved, approaching our table. And Elena. Elena spoke while leaning. My father. The massive figure of Coach Cleats loomed above them. He remained there, frowning, while others chuckled. "Elena, please stand up and dance with me," he demanded. "This guy has been monopolizing you the entire night." "You are wrong, Mr. Cleats," she said. I monopolized it. Can you imagine how many women desired to dance with him? He rejected them all. The coach's expression became angry. My father got up and stepped between Elena and the coach. The coach was furious. I know it's difficult and I feel sad for you, but just because Eddington is having fun with your wife doesn't mean you can too. In my affairs with my wife and myself. My father's fist flew into the coach's face so fast that he didn't realize what was coming at him. The impact was so tremendous that it propelled the coach into the air and knocked him down. A blend of uncertainty, rage, and anguish. I competed for space on my father's face. He gazed around in full amazement. I wasn't sure what to say or do. This was never in my plans. I never anticipated that anyone but me would inform my father what was going on. Unfortunately, a jealous, drunken moron spoiled everything. Just when I thought it couldn't get much worse, the bottom fell out. 3 police officers surged through the gathering and approached my father. He held out his hands to be cuffed, but they only looked at him. "Sir, are you James Carson?" asked the first officer. My father nodded his head. "Sir, please come with us." The officer spoke. "Do I have to wait until we arrive to the station before calling my lawyer?" I asked my father. The police looked at him as if he were insane. "Sir, no one cares if you struck that drunk." The officer spoke. "This is a private party. Security is responsible for keeping order on the premises. We don't care if we don't get called. We came for you since your wife was involved in an accident." "She fell. Ask my father." "She got involved in an automobile accident. The officer claimed she wasn't driving. The man with her has also sustained significant injuries." "We will follow you, Jim," Elena said. I was relieved she took the initiative because I was still in shock and felt terrible for my father. Everything I planned, every scheme I devised, was designed and aimed to cause him the least amount of agony possible. Everything blew out in my face. Dean and Elena led me out of the school. Everyone stared at us. Elena threw her keys to me and told me to follow her. She jumped in my father's car and followed the cops. The tires screeched loudly, but she quickly pulled herself together. I followed her as she requested, and Dean followed suit. I was particularly curious in how my mother had ended up in the accident. After all, she should have stayed home. We entered the waiting room near the reception area. We were escorted to a waiting area on the 3rd level, adjacent to the surgical rooms. It bothered me, and as analytical as my mind is, it made me ponder. I'm sitting here waiting for my mother to come out of surgery, and all I can think about is my dad and how this will influence his plans. Dean was supportive as always, but Elena surprised me the most. I assumed she'd be a neutral observer or at best a worried friend, but she was definitely distraught, and we had no idea what had transpired yet. I hugged her and assured her that everything would be all right as we sat down. A mother entered the room with 2 tiny children. The woman greeted Elena before taking a seat on the opposite side of the room. Elena barely returned the greeting. Her gaze remained fixed on the door. Sitting there, I pondered all of the various outcomes of the events and analyzed how they would affect what I needed to accomplish. The scariest possibility for me was that this disaster would somehow bring my parents closer together. I saw them having tearful chats at her bedside, with him agreeing to forgive her if she simply got better. She will then inform him that I had known about their relationship all along. It has the potential to harm my relationship with the person I care most about. All of this, despite my careful planning, turned into the worst nightmare possible. The doors to the operation rooms and the corridor between them swung open. Before I knew it, the doctor and my father had emerged from behind the door. She had already gotten up and headed towards her father. She hugged him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist while he continued to speak with the doctor. His face was the thing that stood out to me the most. My father attempted to hang on, but he was definitely furious. I leaned closer to hear what they were saying. As I came closer, I could hear some of the conversation. I heard the doctor explain that the head struck the central console beneath the airbag. I also heard she will most certainly need reconstructive surgery if she survives. Another stuff. I barely heard part of it and can't figure out why her head was there. Then I heard the jaw close and took a bite. This final remark finished the picture for me. I must be a monster because I spun around and dashed out of the waiting area. I found the nearest toilet on the floor and ensured that it was empty. Then I just broke into laughter. After about 5 minutes of wild laughter, I was finally able to put on a serious face. When I returned to the waiting area, I overheard a small argument. I'm telling you right now that if you do this your way, you'll live a life full of regrets. My father stood, and Elena took his hand and told him to sit back down. But I don't care. He stated that she is insured under my health coverage. I do not want to be here anymore. I do not want to talk to her. I simply want her out of my life. She drew him back into the chair next her, and he didn't protest. Honey, I understand you don't want to talk to her, which is why I want you to. If you truly want her out of your life, it won't work, she said. He turned to gaze at her, and she hugged him. Even if you leave this hospital with the intention of never seeing or speaking with her again, it will not work. Perhaps you can find a way to have the lawyers handle everything so you never have to speak with her. You either get the house or she gets it, and you will never see each other again. He nodded his head. This will not work, Jim, she continued. My father seemed to calm down as she spoke. I also saw that the woman on the other side of the room was attentive to everything she said. This is the actual world. And when two people are together for a long time, they form bonds. The most crucial of these ties is that you have a beautiful daughter, and there are many more events in her life where you will most likely cross paths. Are you telling me that you won't attend Melinda's wedding because her mother will be present? Or are you going to tell me that you are such a horrible person that you would deny the lady who gave birth to her the opportunity to see her only daughter marry? My father pursed his lips and placed his arms across his chest. Elena seized his hand again, trapping it in her own. I'm not finished holding this hand yet, she murmured. Regardless of your feelings toward her, there is another issue. She started again. Even if you remove her from your life and avoid her, there is the concept of permission. Psychologists like to refer to this as closure. When it comes to people and emotions, I dislike the term over, because nothing is truly over. Even if you've solved everything in 5 or 10 years, you'll still have about 60 questions that you don't know the answers to. But for your own sake, so you don't have to live the rest of your life doubting yourself, you should talk to her. Damn. I thought I was worried Elena wouldn't be as persistent. And what about my father, who was just as weak? Now things were moving so quickly that I was gone for 5 minutes and had no idea what was going on. Elena talked about the rest of their lives as if it was a foregone conclusion that they would spend it together. And my father didn't argue with her. It was exactly what I wanted. But the sequence of events was not at all what I had planned. I probably shouldn't be unhappy because all I wanted was for my dad to separate from my adulterous mom. I wanted him to find someone who would love him and who would be worthy of his love. And it looks like he will end up with the right woman. I just need to make sure all the parts are in place. After thinking about it, I stopped interfering. Let's let the universe sort it out. Life seems to have a way of working things out in the end. Now you're too nervous and too excited. Elena said, stop drinking coffee. Actually, I want you to just get out and go somewhere to calm down. Then come back to me and we'll wait for it together. You said she'd be in the OR for about another hour, right? She will have to stay in intensive care for at least that long. So you have time, but you can't just ignore it. I want you back in an hour. And what's about? He began. Melinda and I are here, she said. We can fill out any forms or do whatever needs to be done. I smiled at him as he looked at me. He came over and hugged me tightly. I walked over and sat down next to Elena. Go, Dad, I said. Elena is right. Driving always calms you down. As my father walked toward the door, a woman from across the room reached over and grabbed sleeve. I'm so sorry for your pain, she said sadly. My father nodded his head. I don't even think he paid attention to what she said to him. Then I recognized her. It was Russell Eddington's wife. Elena started talking as soon as I sat down. Melinda, I thought you were main schemer, she said. But your mother beat us all. She outplayed us all. She tricked your father into thinking she was sick, so she wasn't at the dance. She told you that if she was there, your father would be too shy to dance with me, right? I nodded, trying to understand what she was getting at. The call your father received when we arrived at the dance was from her, Elena said. I know that. I said, I was glad she called because she was the one who got Daddy to dance with you. Don't. Helena said she called him to make sure you and he were at the dance so she could sneak out. Hugs, Russell. Apparently this time they were going to a motel, because last time you found them at your home, she didn't. She didn't know what time you were going to be home, and she didn't want to risk getting caught again. Apparently, he lost control of the car or was simply not paying attention to the road and they crashed into a tree. The airbags deployed perfectly, and Russell only had one injury, but it was a major one. Okay, it's probably a minor injury. I can't believe that damn bitch was going to cheat on him again. I said, Helena, Dad was right. We just don't need her in our lives. Maybe there's nothing they can do about it, a woman said from across the room. I don't understand you, ma'am. I said, but I don't understand your husband either. You are a beautiful woman, and you two have two adorable little girls. You are much more attractive than my mother. Why the hell would he cheat on you with her? Your mother is not the only one, she said. But she will probably be the last, Helena. He never cheated on you, did he? Of course not. Helena answered, as if she had been asked the most obvious thing in the world. But he tried, didn't he? Asked his wife. Helena nodded her head. The only good thing about him is that he is a good provider. My girls and I need that kind of financial security. My plan was wait until my girls are old enough to understand the situation and then divorce. Now this could all be thrown into the air. I'm pretty sure your father is going to name Russell in his divorce case. I'm sure when this happens, your mom will sue him for something, and I'm sure he'll lose his job because of this. I may just have to go ahead and try to get my piece of the pie before it goes completely bust. I'm so sorry this has affected your family, young lady, she said as she was saying this. A light bulb went on in my head. After some time, my father returned. Dean called his parents and told them he was returning home. He hugged and kissed me hastily before saying farewell to everyone. My father sat next to me where Dean was. I stood up and sat on his other side, forcing him next to Helena, who quickly pulled his hand back. We sat and talked about anything except the disaster. We spoke for a long time. I eventually dozed off. When I awoke, the nurse patted my shoulder. I fell asleep on my father's shoulder. He slept with his head flung back. Helena was in the same position as me, only on the shoulders. She also hugged his arm as if she wasn't going to let him go. I found it unusual that I couldn't recall my mother ever holding him so securely. Can you wake up your mother and father and inform them that she is awake, but can only receive guests for a few minutes? And you should move rapidly, because with the amount of medications they gave her, she would soon fall asleep. I woke up my father and Helena thinking about what the nurse had named them, my mother and father. It felt right. We rode the elevator to the 5th floor. The nurse said we may come in one at a time and stay for about 5 minutes. My father approached the door, but Helena grabbed his hand and drew him back. Jim, do not go there angry. She just got out of surgery and is already in a lot of discomfort. Now is not the time to stress about it. Simply pop by and say hi. Could you do this for me? Clenched his fists, then unclenched them and nodded. Helena was fantastic. My dad entered the room. He left for approximately 15 seconds and returned immediately. I went inside. Then one side of her face was totally bandaged. She had tubes that administered medicine to one arm. On the opposite side, her shoulder was bandaged, and she was placed in a frame to keep her back straight and prevent her from rolling over during the night. There was a metal halo affixed to her head from top to bottom, preventing her from opening her mouth. I believe she will need this until her jaw heals. Eyes followed me as I strolled around the room. Hello, Mommy, I said. How do you feel? Her mouth made a grunt-like sound similar to a screech. I warned you that if you cheat on him again, something horrible would happen to you. But you did not listen, so you deserved what you received. And what you receive is a swindle. Mom, since we're the only ones in the room, I'll tell you a little secret. I was not going to lose sight of this. This was my plan from the beginning, ever when I first caught you. I've been looking for someone to care for Dad while I go to college. Helena is ideal for him. I appreciate your help putting these together. She seemed to be capable of handling the situation. Her eyes widened, and it appeared that she was attempting to say something, but the metal circle prevented her from moving. However, it appeared that even attempting to move caused her anguish. But you should be thankful to her. If it were not for her, he would not even come here to see you. I said. She glanced at me fiercely. Mom, don't be furious with me. It was not my fault. I'd want to think about it, however. Dad knows about you and Eddington, but I haven't told him. He found out right before the cops arrived. Guess what? It was not the police either. It was Coach Blitz. The coach was unhappy at Dad and Helena. He drank and told his father he shouldn't. Dad knocked him out. He struck him in the ass in front of the entire school, including his teammates. It made me think, how could the coach know you were training Eddington? The coach and the director aren't exactly friendly. Mom, were you also a coach? I gazed into her eyes, but she couldn't look me in the eye. I just shook my head. What are you doing, Mother? So I guess my 5 minutes are up. I probably won't see you too much. So see you. When I got outdoors, Dad grabbed my hand. Thank you for everything, Helena, he replied. I do not believe I could have done this without you. I thought about what you said, and it makes logic, but I'm not sure I can accomplish it. I am not sure I can pull this off. Even now, when she is not in the room, I want to strangle her, and Eddington is an asshole. He took a long breath to relax himself. Anyway, I apologize if my difficulties ruined your evening. Let's go, Keith. Let us go home, he urged. Have you brought my car here? Helena did. I said. I drove her automobile. Remember when she handed you the keys? Do you still have my keys, Melinda? Helena asked. I nodded. Okay, see you at home. My father's mouth fell, but he'd been listening to her all evening, so he simply agreed. When we arrived home, I simply went over, changed my clothes, and went to bed. I could hear their conversation even when I was sleeping. When I woke up the next morning, I showered and went downstairs to get some food. My father was asleep and purring on the couch. I heard activity in the kitchen. I came in and found Helena standing in front of the stove. She used 2 frying pans in one. She was cooking bacon in another. She was making pancakes. What I noticed most was what she was wearing. She was only wearing my dad's U of M t-shirt. I was certain she was wearing underwear, but I would not bet on it. I borrowed a few things from you, she explained. I didn't want to awaken you. I can't fit any of your mother's belongings. This resolved the underwear issue. Why didn't you borrow some jeans or skirt? I asked. She wrinkled her brow and I understood. She wanted my father to recognize her in the things he treasured the most. We talked all night, she explained. He's quite upset. We will have to help him get over this. Melinda, last night I told him everything about myself. I suppose he's upset with me. Why is he furious with you? I asked. Because I need to be honest with him, she explained. I didn't want any secrets between us, so I told him why I was at the dance. I had to admit that I had been stalking him since I met him while scouting for specimens in the forest. I believe it caused him to regard me as similar to your mother. I suppose he truly believes that I will pursue a married man. The only way to convince him that I am not that horrible is to tell him who told me. He was probably available, and I couldn't do that without handing you over. If I wasn't already certain that it belonged to my father, this sentence convinced me that she belonged not only to him, but also to us. Don't worry, Helena, I said. We will all be in order after breakfast. She nodded and grabbed up the fork and spatula she was using to turn the bacon and cook the pancakes. I took a fork. I am bad at preparing pancakes. After breakfast. Helena borrowed a pair of my sweatpants. Naturally, she chose blue ones that matched her father's hoodie, which she refused to give up. She packed lunch, and while Dad argued and complained the entire time, she took us out for a picnic. We found ourselves back in the jungle, where we had previously hunted for the species. The 3 of us discussed the entire time, and I admitted everything. Helena also told my father that she loved him. The saddest aspect was seeing my father still upset, but unable to deal with what my mother had done. He told Helena several times how gorgeous she was, even saying, I would be crazy about you if it weren't for. We all understood what he meant. Helena inquired why Dean wasn't home, and I reminded her that it was Sunday, and he needed to be at church until at least noon. We left the park and headed home. We got a call from the hospital. Mom awoke and expressed her strong desire to visit my father. He handed the nurse his grandmother's phone number, and we returned home. We stopped by Elena's apartment since she needed clothes. How long are you staying? I asked my father. She arched her brow again. We spent the remainder of the day watching movies and relaxing. Dean joined us after leaving the church. We sat there, watched movies, spoke, laughed, and ate. I observed Helena was never more than a few inches away from my father. The following day, we all returned to the real world. I needed to turn in assignments and take an exam. People stared at me all day. The guys from the team were coming up to me and shouting or laughing. They claimed they also carried out mock strikes. I discovered what was going on shortly before noon. Nobody knew exactly what happened at the dance. Few people heard what Kaulitz told my father, but everyone witnessed the outcome. Strangely enough, no one spotted it until this morning. However, Coach Kaulitz was also in the hospital when he landed on his buttocks. He broke his tailbone. The assistant coach led the training. Toward the conclusion of the day, we were all summoned to the hall for a meeting. The deputy director informed us that Principal Eddington was engaged in an accident over the weekend and will be hospitalized in the near future. She advised us that we should continue to work as if he were still around, since it was what he wanted. She told us to keep praying for him, and I'm glad we didn't. One person inquired how long he would be gone, and she said she didn't know, but he would return as soon as possible. Another person inquired about the degree of his injuries. This made me giggle. I returned home and glanced in the refrigerator. I had made dinner once or twice before, so I decided to make it again. I had plenty of time because Dad wouldn't get home from work for at least 90 minutes. I was astonished when I heard a car approach. I was even more astonished when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and found Helena. I stepped aside and she entered. She entered the kitchen and looked around. "What are you doing now?" she asked. "Burgers." I smiled. "I'll take them and fry them when Dad returns from his exercise." "Is he running?" she asked. I just nodded. "Okay. What are we cooking for?" "The parties," she asked. I shrugged. "What about a beautiful, huge salad?" she asked. "We will combine anything we can find. If you don't like it, don't put it on the plate. That is a good idea," I said. She took out a large bowl and we chopped the vegetables, onions, and mushrooms. "Do you think he wouldn't mind if I ran away with him?" she asked. "I think he'd enjoy it," I said. And she did it. When my father got home, she was waiting for him in her gym clothes, and I'm sure he noticed how good she looked. They returned home, showered, and we all ate dinner together. During supper, we talked while avoiding the gorilla in the room. Helena said that her car produced unusual noises and occasionally lost power after dinner. Dad drove his car into the garage and went to work. Helena took out her reading glasses and started reviewing her papers in the garage next to him. My grandmother called to ask if she could come. Dad assured her that she was always welcome. Helena went upstairs to take a lengthy bath. My grandmother wanted to know why Dad was not in the hospital on Sunday or that day. She looked at me and inquired whether my father was preventing me from visiting my mother. Apparently, my mother did not tell her anything. "Jim, I know she had an accident and totaled her automobile." "But this isn't even your automobile. Why are you so upset at her?" When Dad related the scenario and the details of the occurrence to my grandmother, she nearly passed out. She apologized to my father, who stated that he ensured she had the best possible care, but he was still too furious and upset to visit her. After that, my grandmother left, still stunned as she got into her car and drove away. A week later, we all attended the Harvest Festival dance. Of course, I am with Dean and my father is with Helena. If I thought she looked good during the rehearsal dance, it was nothing compared to the actual dance. The most significant difference was in how they were handled. Everyone knew they were a couple. Not a single guy approached her and asked her to dance. I believe there were two causes behind this. First and foremost, she refused to allow my father leave all night. She even held his hand while they were eating. Second, individuals continued to discuss what had occurred to the coach. I heard a few guys say, "Dude, if you ask her to dance, this guy will knock you out." It was a lovely evening. This helped Helena to come out of her shell and demonstrate her friendliness, charm, and sense of humor. She didn't have to worry about guys hitting on her all the time when my father was present. Her smile and the brightness in her eyes increased threefold. Of course, she smiled at him the majority of the time, which is normal. Even when the dance became history, it merely evolved. She no longer had to hide behind lab coats and silly safety glasses, so a lot more guys ran into the walls. But every night she waited for my father at home and occasionally went to the factory where he worked, as if she couldn't wait to see him again. This continued for several weeks. Dad and Helena both offered to take me to the hospital if I wanted to go. Dad also told me that if I wanted to go alone, I could use Mom's car or the Jeep he used in the winter. Helena and he were rarely apart. They were only separated when they were working. Of course, while they were sleeping, their romance, if you can call it that, was completely school-related. I doubt I've ever seen them kiss. I understood how Helena felt about my father, but I had no idea how he felt about her until one evening when he arrived home and she wasn't there. He didn't ask me anything, so I chose not to tell him. He gazed around the house before looking outdoors. He didn't say anything, therefore I didn't give any information. However, I discreetly videotaped him looking about the house and continually staring out the window. When she eventually arrived, he pretended everything was all right. "Hello," he said, and entered the garage. Helena stared at me oddly. "What did I do?" she asked. I told her. "Why haven't you told him? Did we have a parent-teacher conference today?" she asked. "Because it's time," I explained. "What is it time for?" Helena was asked. "Dad is stranded in limbo. It is time for him to return to the real world. He doesn't even think about his mother. She's been in the hospital for nearly a month and we haven't seen her once. I can take you to her if you want," Elena said. "Damn me." I said, "I do not want to see her. Perhaps he does not want to either." Even as I watched the expression on her face, I knew her father was standing on end, and she was prepared to battle for my father. Elena calmed down. "But we both understand that he needs to initiate divorce proceedings or something similar. He cannot simply forget about her and hope she goes gone. She texts me every day, and I am sure she texts him as well. She will probably begin phoning as soon as she is able to speak. You are also present." I said. "What is wrong with us?" she asked. Her cheeks reddened and she blushed even while speaking. "Elena, he is deeply in love with you." I said, "You know it well." "I do more than just love him," she said. "That is it." I said, "But he needs to say that he feels the same way for you. How do we know he truly feels this way?" she asked. "Maybe he only sees me as a family friend." I showed her the video I had just recorded of him strolling around the home, peering into every room and staring out the window. "What was he searching for?" Smiled. "Are you Elena?" I smiled. "He doesn't confess it, but he truly missed you. So it's time for him to quit pretending, get on with his life." "Hold that thought," she said. "Indeed, the time has come." I watched her stroll through the kitchen and out to the garage. My father was leaning over his car and doing something. I'm not sure what he does with this car all the time. I believe he's chatting to her. But she patted him on the shoulder and he stood up. She placed her arms around him, drew his face into hers, and kissed him. He stood there for a moment before wrapping his arms around her and kissing her back. Watching them made me wish I weren't such a good girl. And Dean and I did not take the vow of chastity. This website made my legs give way. Principal Eddington returned to school the next day, while the coach returned the following week. The coach walked hunched over, slowly. Eddington never left the office. He has a new secretary. This was his wife. She smiled at me every time I passed her in the corridors. She inquired about her mother, and I had to respond that I had not seen her. She inquired how my father was doing, and I believe she cared. After all, she had been through the same things he had. So she understood how much it hurt. I guess they were all waiting to see what my father would do. Eddington asked me about my father. I had to tell him that it would be at least a week before Mom could remove the metal brace from her face and try to speak. My grandma, who frequently called and begged us to pay my mother a visit, informed me of this. It looked like everything was awaiting my father's choice and plan of action. Eddington understood that if my father mentioned him in the divorce, his career would be done. My mother will most likely try to sue him, whether she succeeds or fails. However, the mere mention of what happened between them will harm his career. Coach Cowlitz was frightened of me and avoided Helena at all costs. He acted as if my father might emerge from behind a tree and strike him again. He wrote Helena a letter apologizing for his behavior and promised to leave her alone. I believe his biggest issue was that he was always considered the guy at school, and many of his teammates continued to mock him behind his back. Helena and my father were also on standby. She essentially lived with us, but they never slept together. They might as well have done it because there were so many nights when I went up for a drink and discovered them sleeping together on the couch, still fully dressed but cuddled together as if their lives depended on it. Finally, the strain is relieved. Without hesitation, I answered the phone and heard my mother's voice. "Hey, Melinda, is your father available?" When my disbelief subsided, I handed him the phone. When he answered the phone, his back straightened and his entire posture transformed. He spoke a few sentences before hanging up. Helena grasped his hand and he smiled awkwardly. I don't see any use in putting it off any longer. Let the battle begin. The next day, he visited her. According to what he told me later and what I learned from my grandmother when he entered the room, she was sitting up straight in her bed. She lost weight and used makeup to conceal the appearance of bruises. She continued to be aggressive as usual, but it was no longer effective. James, I'm sorry you haven't been able to come see me yet, she remarked. How can we repair our marriage? We do not talk. I realize I made a tremendous mistake, and it will take us a long time to recover from it. In fact, I do not believe we can tackle this alone. I have a therapist at the hospital. She practices family therapy. Maybe next time you come, you should bring Melinda, and we should schedule a session with her. My father spoke out. He just placed a stack of papers on her bed beside her. She cried while looking at the documents. No, she replied. We do not do that. We need to discuss this. Okay, let's discuss with Teresa, he said. Explain to me why you did this to us. Tell me how our daughter discovered you and that moron in our bed inside our house. Tell me about an 18-year-old girl who had to try to save her father since his heart had been crushed, and then he had to put everything back together once I found out. Anyway, tell me how that fool coach discovered what you were doing to Eddington. Tell me about how Melinda caught you and you vowed you'd stop, but then you started seeing him again. Come on, Jim, speak. I apologize. She whined. We need to get through this. I will never do this again, I vow. You said the exact same thing to Melinda. He said there was probably nothing else to talk about. Get a lawyer, Teresa. The next day, my mother received legal divorce papers in her hospital ward, according to the grandmother. Who was there? A female who appeared to be a student entered the room, chewing gum and holding a folder. Teresa Carson? She asked. My mother expected it and simply offered her hand. This sparked the battle. They fought for several weeks. They traded accusations. My mother hesitated to agree to the divorce, and even filed counter-accusations. She stated that Dad had moved his lover into the house, which was technically correct. Elena felt bad about it. The day after the allegations were made, she returned to her residence for the first time in months. My father went and brought her home. He informed her that her place was with us and nowhere else. The fight lasted for weeks. I finally couldn't take it. I questioned Dad about his upcoming meeting with Mom and her lawyers. He told me that the next day I would go see my mother in the evening. I conveyed to her that she had lost her father. There was no way he'd ever take her back. The most she could do was be courteous. After so much back and forth, the Pope retracted his original suggestion for a deal. He no longer made her any offers. He simply wanted to say, "Fuck you. Get out of my home." Dad wanted a house, full custody of me, and for Mom to stop bothering him. He refused to repay her for wrecking his life. He also intended to sue Eddington for everything he could. I invited Mr. Eddington and his wife to our meeting. I sat at a long table with Dad and Elena at one end. Mr. Eddington and his wife were on one side, while Mom and her lawyers were on the other. I presented them with my plan. My plan called for Mr. Eddington to pay my mother's child support for 4 years and rehire her as his secretary. Mom could then go to college and obtain some skills, allowing her to sustain herself once child support is no longer provided. Dad received the house. Mom kept the automobile and rented Elena's apartment. In exchange, Dad promised not to sue or discuss Mr. Eddington in the divorce proceedings. And Mom did not try to make a false sexual assault claim. I could agree with it. Eddington stated his wife appeared relieved. She smiled at me and said I'd be a wonderful lawyer someday. It was a decent deal for the Eddingtons. Paying my mother child support for 4 years would be costly, but it would be less expensive than any of the cases my parents could pursue. He also managed to keep his job. Neither my father nor my mother seemed convinced. It simply doesn't feel right. My dad said, it turns out that they ruined my life and family for free. Teresa simply leaves without any hassles or consequence, and he simply moves away and preserves his career. I will not consent to this at all. My mother answered, I am not going to abandon my family. I acknowledge I made a mistake, but I was forced to. Eddington was the boss. He was a powerful man. I had no choice. If I hadn't reached an agreement with him, I might have lost my job. It's too late to start afresh. I want my life and family back. Shut up, Mom! I shouted sternly. You must accept this agreement so that we can all move forward. Mr. Eddington may have been your boss, but you've forgotten I caught you. And if I testify to what I heard and observed, your case will fail. You also forget that at the time of the accident, you were no longer employed by Mr. Eddington, so there could have been no coercion. There are two more items to consider. First, just one word from me will cause Dad to drop you from his health insurance. Without this, you'll never be able to afford to mend your face. You'll have to live your life looking like a Picasso painting. And finally, Mom, you did not abandon your family. You threw it away. We simply weren't as important to you as what you did for Mr. Eddington. So you do not deserve us. If you go too far, you may not have the opportunity to make friends in the future. Make the right decision, Mom. Stop some of Dad's agony. Let him go. I looked to my father. Dad, you are right. Of course. You're the one who suffered here. I see it. So let me just tell you two things. Because while you were correct in your point, you should look beyond it. Mama and Mr. Eddington both bear significant consequences for their actions. Maybe it's not enough, but they do pay. Mr. Eddington has lost a significant portion of his anatomy. Apparently, it will not be simple for him. The reimplantation procedure was unsuccessful. Therefore, they will try to construct a new one for him. So that's one of his payment methods. He'll also pay Mom's child support so you don't have to. Isn't that enough to make him suffer, should his family pay for his? Children deserve to be cared for too, Dad. They are also victims. If you destroy his career, you will also destroy the lives of two innocent children who did not cause you damage. It won't be easy for him anyway. Even if you do this, his wife despises him. She'll make his life horrible, and he'll have to work every day with his mother, who blames him for our loss. It will not be simple either. Mom suffers too, Dad. She loses the man she says she loves. She also has a daughter. She loses her home and all of her pals. Even the position that Mr. Eddington provides her is temporary. She will have to regain her strength and begin her life afresh. Life isn't simple for older single ladies. My mother started crying, and if you think about it, Dad, it will be better for you in two ways. You are getting rid of a woman you will never trust again. You get rid of a woman who has cheated on you multiple times. You can get on with your life and never see her again. We both can. In exchange, you get the nicest, most attractive, and wonderful lady I know to share your life with. My father smiled and embraced Elena. Why are you hugging her? I was talking about myself, I quipped. Keith, you're so humorous, said Elena. My father nodded his head. Okay, I agree, he replied. I looked at my mom. She nodded, then buried her head and started crying again. The attorneys will codify everything. As previously stated, the idea of forcing one of the cheaters to pay alimony to the other was unusual, but both parties were confident they could do it. If the judge does not agree with the terms as written, Mr. Eddington will simply send child support to Dad, who will then pay it to Mom. 3 days later, they met again to sign documents. My mother brought my grandmother with her. My father was with Elena and me, and Mr. Eddington was alone. After signing the documents, my mother reached out to my father with tears in her eyes. She asked him for one last kiss, and Elena said no. Probably a week later, Elena came to me for help. She gave me money and the keys to her car and asked me to take Becky and Dean to the movies. I'm probably not the wittiest person because I didn't understand at first. Then, she suddenly realized that she wanted to spend time alone with my father. I laughed and looked at her. You don't have to send me away, I said. Is this something special? Have you already started experimenting? What do you usually do? We haven't, actually. My God. I said, I'm leaving. I didn't know you two weren't yet. It must have gone very well, because the next morning they were both grinning from ear to ear, a few months later. And here we are at church. I stand here fulfilling the role of both bridesmaid and bridesmaid. Hell, why not? Since I was the one who introduced them and brought them closer together. The problem is that my mom just won't shut up. I'm not sure why they invited her. Maybe they wanted to rub her nose in the face. Maybe she just barged into the wedding. But we had to have this wedding this week. I'm leaving for college next week, and I'm not sure how long Elena will be able to fit into her wedding dress. The doctor says she may be pregnant with twins. A few minutes later, the priest asked a question at the end of the wedding vows. Does anyone here know of any reason why this man and woman should not be engaged? I approached my mother when she was about to speak. I leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Mom, if you open your mouth, I will slap you here in this church." Well, this is the part where I have to say, and they lived happily ever after. Thank you for taking the time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this essay, please like it and subscribe if you have not already. If you have a story to share regarding your or someone else's situation, please do not hesitate to contact